Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session. Great to see so many people here today. My name is Barrett Mystery. I work for Trend Micro, and over the next 40, 45 minutes, we're going to look at why it's important to recognize that actually cyber risk is a business risk and something that needs to be tackled in a business manner. And what we're going to do is we're going to dive into a number of things, actually. I suppose in today's cloud and really AI-driven world, innovation growth has to go hand in hand with security, especially when we look at the regulatory landscape that sits right now around AI, the privacy, the data, and everything. They have to go together because breaches can become expensive, right? The question is, how do you manage that innovation and growth without that disruption? And that's what this session aims to do, is to look at some strategies around that. What we'll do is we'll cover some practical insights, some real-world outcomes, and really how AWS and Trend Micro can empower proactive risk management, because that's the name of the game here. And we'll take a meandering tour as we go through, and we'll look at really what does today's security environment look like, the approaches that have been adopted, and the problems that it has created for all organizations, right? We'll then think about the mind shift change required to go to proactive and why we want to do that. We'll look at things like communicating risk to non-technical stakeholders, so outside of the security team or the IT team, and really why something like a platform-based approach is really needed to have a true visibility of your enterprise and what's going on. And we'll finally end off with a case study with Northeast Georgia Health System, who are actually transforming cybersecurity in their environment to be a business enabler. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A as well, so let's see how we go on. So, in light of recent high-profile cyber attacks that we've seen, like certainly in the UK, most people will know about Jaguar Land Rover. I think recently in the US with Bridgestone as well. It's had some major impact. If we look at just JLR, the direct impact on them was $220 million. 5 weeks loss of production. So you can imagine the state of that organization. Everything shut down for 5 weeks. That's huge, right? For a manufacturer where you've got piling stock, you want to get that money out, you've got to sell those assets. More importantly, you've got to think about the disruption to the supply chain as well. In many cases, some of those niche suppliers that supplied JLR have gone bust. So not only is it an impact on you as an organization, but who do you partner with? And then really lastly, it's the cost to get them out of that situation. They had to take a £1.5 billion loan from UK government to rectify the situation. So you can see, in every boardroom right now, it's become a war room for managing cyber risk. And I suppose we need to peel back. What do we mean by cyber risk? I think at its core, it's really an operational risk. We've got to think about moving the conversation beyond IT or beyond technology and moving it back into an operational context. And I'll give a bit of detail behind this. So, for example, in the UK, the National Cybersecurity Centre, they're calling and they want to advocate something called resilience engineering or business resilience. And this is where cyber needs to come in, because it's about the ability to provide core and critical services and applications whilst under any kind of disruption. Being able to absorb that pressure and maintain those critical services whilst under attack. That's very different to where cyber's been seen. Cybersecurity has always been about prevention in the past. But what we're looking to do now, as we talk about business risk, It's moving it into a conversation around resilience and into business continuity, because that's the name of the game now, I would say. Certainly, on the resilience side of things, it's very much a differentiator. And just going back to what the NCSE was saying, they're actually advocating that in worst case scenarios, you assume that no IT is available and you have to go back to paper-based systems. And that's quite a big step and a bold step that needs to be tested and tried. And it tells you this is more than just a technology issue. It has now become a people and a process issue as well. And these are the kind of differentiators that really start to matter. So when we think about the reality of modern cyber risk, actually, before I talk about the risk itself, if you think about most organizations, there are 4 pillars that the board will always focus and center on, right? First, it's growth, right? Having that revenue, going back to shareholders and making sure that we are growing the business in the right way. Hence, we've got kind of innovation through cloud and AI happening right now. It's to give you that competitive edge, right? That growth is underpinned by customer trust. That's the fuel factor that drives the growth engine for any organization. If you've got trust in your customers, they're going to buy from you, they're going to innovate with you and take that forward. And customer trust is largely based on compliance. They want to know that anything that they're acquiring, they're buying, they're using is compliant. So if you buy, for example, any electronics in the UK, you'll always get a CE badge to tell you it's at a certain level or a certain standard, right? And then lastly, it's around operational risk or operational resilience. And the factor that connects all of these 4 pillars together is cyber risk. Because if you get cyber risk wrong and you don't manage it in the right way, it has a direct impact on all of them. Just going back to the growth pillar alone, it can severely hamper innovation. By any breach, it could lead to a compliance friction. It could lead to other activities which you would never foreseen and delay that go-to-market. Same in things like regulations as well. Regulations are getting tighter, as I spoke about. And having a breach has a material impact on that, which is linked to the operational resilience, because any outage will carry downtime and potentially high costs as well. Not just loss in business, but also penalties that could come out of it as well. So you can see cyber risk is an integrating factor that kind of drives all of these things together. So the question really now comes to saying, well, why does it matter right now? And there are a number of different things behind this, right? It kind of, I suppose, at its base level, it kind of signals the start of what we call shared responsibility and accountability, where cybersecurity outcomes influence executive pay and corporate governance. So let's just take a step back here. What was just an IT issue is now being taken right up the stack, right up to the board. And I would say every business unit owner is accountable for the data and the systems they manage. And if you want to see a real-world example of this, Qantas, they cut executive bonuses by 15% recently on the back of the breach that they suffered. So you can see that corporate responsibility is going all the way to the top. So there's a vested interest at the board level. Cyber risk is no longer delegated. It's actually collectively owned. And going back to what I said earlier, it's got to go hand in hand with that innovation and growth to have that security element there. And when we think about this innovation and growth, this is a hot theme right now. AI is reshaping every business as we see right now. New business models, new insights, new go-to-markets. Right? It's allowing you to do things faster, quicker, cheaper. But as you can see from the stats, there are some concerns here, right? we see two sides to a coin, I would say. On the one hand, we're seeing organizations use AI to boost that kind of efficiency and competitive edge. But on the other hand, and you can see the figure up there, 93% express a concern around the increased security risks posed by not only internal use, but also third-party developed capability. I talked about the supply chain earlier, and in this context, it's that software supply chain, that software bill of materials. How do you know what the exposure is? How do you vet what is coming into your organization? And what does it leave you open to? This duality underscores the kind of balancing act that organizations are under. It goes back to my opening statement about how do you manage innovation and growth with the right security or the guardrails to kind of get you there. And I suppose what it boils down to really is having some robust risk management strategies when integrating innovations like this into your organization. And that's what we're going to dive into. Again, for a bit more context, let's have a look at why does this actually exist and why is it so complex right now. This is a picture of the kind of what we call attack surface. And I would say maybe 5 years ago, probably even less than that, certainly pre-pandemic, everything was on-premise. So from an organizational point of view, you had your arms around all those assets. You knew what you were controlling. All your people were working in an office. All your assets predominantly would have been in the data center, but there could be some in the cloud. But you had a good handle on what's going on. Certainly throughout the pandemic and post-pandemic, we've seen this accelerated growth of the attack surface. We're seeing use of SaaS applications at a level that we've never seen before. If you think about just AI applications, ChatGPT, Copilot, all that, over the last kind of 15 months, you've seen that acceleration. I've talked about the supply chain and third party already as well. More and more as they become digital in their nature, how do you control, how do you manage that, how do you know what's going on? Work from home is an attack surface that has exploded, I would say. Organizations are struggling to get their employees back into the office because, hey, I could get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, do a couple of hours work, and then have a good few hours off, right? Everyone wants that kind of flexibility. But that home environment alone introduces complexity. If you think about the devices that could be there could be unmanaged devices. You've got PlayStations on there, right? You've got all these other kits. People with smart fridges. Why would you want a smart fridge? I don't know, but it doesn't make sense. But you can see that there is an opportunity, certainly for a threat actor or a hostile person to breach one of these devices. And we've seen these reports already. They're easily broken into, home routers, smart TVs. And then it's just a lateral hop onto what would be a corporate device, and you tunnel back through. IoT, OT, that's a known issue as well. Cloud-native apps and services is on the incline. The use of non-sanctioned applications and the risks they introduce as well. And then lastly, we've kind of spoken about AI already. Right? So how have organizations tackled managing this kind of complexity in the past? It's been done like this. Actually, there's 3 parts to the equation, but they've always defaulted to the easiest one. It's really a people problem, it's a process problem, but everyone's jumped onto the technology bandwagon to address this problem. And there's no kind of blame here. I would say the people to blame could be vendors like Trend Micro, I suppose, who create the hype, say you need this technology, there's a bit of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt in all of this, and trying to promote those sales. So what we end up doing, certainly as organizations, we end up buying technology for specific, very specific use cases. If you think about it, like on an endpoint, you'll buy some anti-malware capability, you might buy some DLP capability. Lo and behold, someone says, actually, you need some EDR capability. And all of a sudden, I've got 3 tools on that endpoint. We've seen organizations with firewalls. There was a mantra, I would say probably 6 years ago, you need dual skin firewalls from 2 different vendors based on the kind of fear that actually if one was compromised, the other one wouldn't, or if there's a vulnerability in one firewall, there wouldn't be in the second, right? And we see that through things like sandboxing technology, cloud technology. And more often than not, these are, I would say, independent, best-of-breed tools. And you'd be right in your mindset thinking, oh, I'm going to buy the best-of-breed, it's going to protect me for this. And yeah, that's probably the good way of doing it. But the investment required is quite high. And the real kind of proof of the pudding is here. When we are under attack, or even before an attack, and we start to ask these questions, and these aren't technical questions, these are questions that the board might ask or a non-technical stakeholder. We'll say, are we in danger? What happened? How many resources have we got? And what should I do next? Invariably, this happens, right? You jump from console to console, manual processes, because doing things, that's the only way you could do it, unless you've got a team that can do integration for you. And the repeatability factor goes away, because that IPR sits with that individual. If you've got junior staff coming through, how are they ever going to learn? Or they build their own kind of IPR stack. The thing is, it's unique in each environment, and you just cannot replicate that. And we end up in this kind of scenario. Risks, threats, and infections are absolutely impossible to see. Now, you imagine that could be an on-premise environment, but what if you're in cloud, multi-cloud, and third parties as well? How do you create that true picture? It causes a problem, right? And it kind of leads to, I would say, this kind of scenario here. Leaders are struggling, and it's no real surprise, right? When we're talking and we're communicating about risk, it comes down to posture and understanding the posture. These independent tools don't give you that. They give you alert and telemetry information. And that leads on to that second point. It's demonstrating the return on investment. More often than not, certainly in my time, I've worked with a lot of organizations that have bought the latest and greatest, and they've never deployed anywhere near 30 to 40% of their tech, not only the licenses, but the capabilities as well. They've bought it for a very tiny use case, and they've never used it. In some cases, it's been left as shelfware. So how do you demonstrate that return on investment? And the last is, really, it's linking exposure back to what I would say service chains or those business critical assets. I see something, I've got some technology that I got from this vendor, something happens on there. How do I know which tier 1 services it's affecting? How do I know it's not affecting my ERP? How do I know it's not affecting my e-commerce site or anything like that? So you can see where kind of leaders are in this kind of situation. And we'll kind of dive into some. These are the challenges that we see right now. Those independent tools that I talked about. I've worked in organizations where they've had 40-plus tools. And it's meant that they've had to have 3 full-time employees just doing tool maintenance. Just think about that, 3 FTEs just managing and maintaining your security infrastructure. Not doing any triage, not doing any analysis, they're just babysitting, watering and feeding that environment. I mean, that's expensive, right? Second problem is, you got these siloed tools, and you end up in this situation where we've got overload. There's just so much coming through. Where do you even begin? How do you even actually say, oh, a critical on this tool here is the same as a critical on that tool there? Do the two of them come together, and do you get a true picture of what's happening? You might do, you might not, unless you've done some integration. So you end up with these visibility gaps in your organization. And, it's kind of partly led, unless you've got those complex integrations right in the first place, it's a nightmare. You think about when you do a change in the stack. the impact it could have. So think about an endpoint. You might have anti-malware, you might have DLP, you might have media control, you might have EDR, and you might have, a management agent on there. That's 5, right? So if you update one, what's the impact on the others? So you can see where we are. And we end up in this scenario where costs are spiraling, they're actually very high, and the alignment back to the business, going back to what I was saying about exposure, is very low. So the result, you end up with this. Reactive security kind of wastes time and budget. Reactive approaches, they kind of lead to firefighting after the incidents occur. It's time-consuming, and it's expensive. Unplanned responses often require, I would say, emergency fixes. Depending on whether you can do it yourself or whether you've got a service organization to help you. There is operational disruption in all of this, I would say. And it's no surprise, right? Business leaders struggle to quantify the exposure and making it hard to prioritize investment. So when you're out there saying, we need this capability, it's really difficult because they just see this as, it's just sunken costs, which isn't delivering any value back to the business. It's just a bottom line cost, like an insurance policy that you might use and might not, right? And without kind of, I would say, measurable outcomes and some predictive metrics, security investments, as I said, they don't really mean anything. So what do we actually need? Let's grab a sip of water. We need to fundamentally kind of rethink how we do security. We need a mind shift change. Certainly to move away from where we are. And I think, really, the best way to do this is to really go up the stack again and think about actually what drives boardroom funding. What is a board and what is a business actually interested in? And again, it comes down to, I would say, these are 3 core pillars I see. There are others, but it's materially down to these 3. It's around reducing that material risk. I'm not talking about cyber, I'm talking about risk across the board. All organizations have a corporate risk register, and there's an appetite against each of those risks. Is it something that I cannot live with, and I'll do something about it? Is it something I can kind of tolerate? Or is it a risk where I just put my head in the sand and hope nothing happens? It's one of those scenarios, right? But ultimately, boards, they want to invest really where risk reduction protects the business and the value. That's the core to it. And this is about the alignment of your security strategy into that process. It's also about kind of lowering that run costs and complexity. Going back to that scenario I talked about, where you've got 40 plus tools, it's complex. The operational side of it, maintenance side of it, it is super complex, and it adds, I would say, exposure that you wouldn't really want in an organization. And kind of measuring those threat metrics back to business impact is difficult as well. I spoke about it before. And the last bit is really increasing the value, or the speed to value. So faster delivery, giving better outcomes, and really giving confidence to the board. Because they're ultimately going to have to respond to shareholders and say, yeah, we've got this level exposure, and this is how we're dealing with it. So we need to actually think about how do we put something like this in play, or what kind of strategy could we use? And one model that I've used in the past is a maturity model. So on the left-hand side, we've got varying degrees of maturity. And on the vertical side, we've got situational awareness. Situational awareness is what's happening, what should I do to combat that, and what's going to happen, right? What's happening, what should I do next, and what will happen after that. It's anticipating all of that. And you can see we've got this kind of growing chart where, I suppose, where you've got low maturity and just got those tools, you're just taking alert information in. Your maturity levels are low. And it's very low on that situational awareness because all you're seeing is just alert information, nothing else. As we start kind of going up that curve and looking at dynamic data, so let's say vulnerability information, for example, we start to get a picture of actually what could I be open to? And we see, patching regimes and things like that, which kind of get you partly on the front foot. But really where the differentiator really starts to kick in is understanding risk. What does that exposure mean in my business and how can I relate it back to something tangible? And when we start to map what I call actionable intelligence on top of that, it really does kind of drive some value. I'm in a vertical like pharma, for example. We see something happening with our peer. We've got some intelligence. We know it's this kind of campaign. We see these kind of tactics. If I know that beforehand, I can start doing something about it. And as we kind of start going up the chain, we can think about actually reporting as well. And people often forget about this, reporting those metrics in a way that makes sense, reporting against how are we doing today, how are we doing tomorrow, and what's our projection likely to be, and the analysis behind it. And I suppose what we're trying to do here is we're creating a journey path to proactive risk management. Because if you start putting these blocks in play, we get this kind of side benefit that comes from it. The time to fix dramatically increases. We've seen recent studies right now, actually every year Ponymon do it, and it's still kicking around 240 days. Mean time to detect, mean time to contain, mean time to respond. If you can get on the front foot, and what I mean is if you can understand what's open right now, the impact it can have, and start remediating them before anything happens, you dramatically reduce that time to fix. You're only then kind of responding to things that you would never foreseen, really. And that makes a big difference. It goes back to the previous slide, those 3 pillars. This helps you kind of address, give you a tick box against all of them. So when we think about it from a security perspective, what are the kind of mind shift changes we need to think about? We need to actually move from that reactive defense to a more proactive risk-based approach. It's like if you buy a house, right? You do risk management every day in your own heads. You buy a house. I've spent so much money. I've only got let's say $1,500 left to secure the home. Where do I begin? You'll automatically say, okay, I'm going to protect my front door first, and I'm going to put 2 or 3 things. I'm going to put a bolt in. I'm going to put a 5-lever lock in. I'm going to put maybe some CCTV in or a Ring doorbell. But I've got a window up in the attic. I'll leave that alone because I know no one's going to go up there. Right? They're not going to take the time to break in and do that because the risk is too high. And that has to be the same when we're looking at security. You've got to take that approach. Second thing is you've got to move away from those independent tools and look at an integrated platform. Somewhere where you ingest the data once and then it can be shared across a number of different capabilities to drive different outcomes, whether it's reactive data, whether it's exposure management, whether it's trying to predict what could happen. And last, it's about really mapping that technical information into business-relevant insights. When the question is asked, what's our exposure in terms of our tier 1 services, that's what we're talking about. It's knowing that these alerts mapping onto these applications, onto this compute, onto this storage, onto this part of the network has an impact. So what we really need is security that's going to adapt to your business. And what we're trying to do really here is make security a vehicle to drive those innovations in a secure manner. Not the department and know, not that kind of reactive model, but actually allow you to innovate in a way that says, yeah, we can use cloud, we can use AI, we can do agentic or autonomous and know that we're covered on these guardrails. And it begins with things like having total visibility, especially in the kind of hybrid context that we see now, where you've got data and applications on-premise, data and applications out in public cloud. and you need to have that true picture, be it across, I would say, identity. So people think identity is all about humans, but it's not. In this new kind of AI world, it's non-human identities that we need to think about as well. Those NHIs, how many people, actually, just as a quick show of hands, how many people treat non-human identities as a human identity that you would then do kind of moves, adds, changes, and revoke privilege? One person, you're brave. But people forget, they completely forget. And it's the same with like AI agents. You've got to treat them as humans because like they're kind of augmenting what a human employee would do. You need to take that kind of risk-driven approach as well. I talked about looking at your house and assessing where the risks are and then putting your investment in those places. And that's what really matters here, is you've got to get the best bang for your buck, you've got to put it in the right place to give you that kind of deliverable outcome. And then it's that strategic alignment as well. Those priorities that actually lower costs, that actually drives the business forward as well. Oh, come on, why isn't it working? So one of the vehicles that we can use is actually measuring risk. And a very specific form of it called cyber risk quantification. Let's start off by actually saying, why do we want to measure it? Right? It's about the very end pillar. It's about decision making. You want to measure the risks so you can actually answer these questions around hiring, around justifying the budget that you want for your projects, for your transformation programs, the insurance choices that you might make. Those investment decisions are based on some tangible information. But actually, those decisions are based on two other assessments or two other pillars here. Assessment is also key. You need to kind of have a view of what does the posture look like in your environment. You need to look at the likelihood of incidents, I would say. So techniques like threat modeling, where you might use something like PASTA as a framework. You need to understand how might an attacker infiltrate and then laterally move around the organization. And what's the chance of that happening? What could happen over time as well? And then it's about the communication bit. It's about linking the two together. From the security team talking predominantly speeds and feeds to actually talking to a language that non-technical stakeholders such as business unit owners or the board are likely to understand. People like the CFO, legal, and really translate it in a way that comes out to, I would say, outcomes for the business in terms of operational resilience. And if we look at kind of how risk management is done right now, in most organizations, people are kind of in these three bubbles, I would say, right now. People have either done custom reports, either using Excel. Excel's a great tool, but I've seen a lot of people do that, but it's only in that instant, in that time, right? We've seen manual compliance reports happening as well. Again, it's in that instance, that time. And certainly in these two areas, I've seen external auditors come in because organizations just don't have the skills or the know-how how to do risk management or to do an audit. And so we see these, I would say, scorecards that are now coming out. They're basic in their nature, very external focus, no real insight into, I would say, what your attack surface is. You don't really know the algorithms they're using. So we've seen some automation, but it's not good enough. Where we need to get to is these three pillars. We need some kind of continuous scoring. So you know what's going on. Your cloud and AI environment is agile. It's dynamic. It's either changing left or right or growing, shrinking. So you need a scoring capability that maps that as well. You need to understand where you are in terms of compliance as well. Your developers might be bringing up new services and using data in different ways. Are we violating anything? Do we need to know? If you think about it in the AI context, if you think about a prompt that someone uses and puts PII information in there, what have we violated in one go? So you've got to have some an indication of what could happen. And then ultimately, it's cyber risk quantification. And what I mean by that is actually mapping the risk to some kind of tangible value. And we'll look at some of that in a minute. So risk scoring in terms of cyber risk exposure, we can think of it in two ways, right? First of all, it's the environment itself, looking at the wide kind of asset types that we have out there, the range of data sources. You may even want to do things like comparison to peers to understand, what are my competitors doing in this space? And how do they stack up? You want to know about trending over time. Because once you get that kind of information, you can track it over time. You can use it as a basis for the communication to those non-technical stakeholders. What are the weak spots? What's the most important mitigations we need to address? What's our exposure look like over time? Are we getting better or are we getting worse? That's a common question to see in a lot of boards. The question is, how do you kind of answer that? Do you put your finger up in the air or do you prove it with some tangible data? Right? And this is where kind of risk quantification really comes in. There are various models out there, but the most popular one that I've seen certainly right now is a model called Factor Analysis of Information and Risk, or FAIR model. And what we're looking to do here is go away from that finger in the air model to actually put in some quantitative metrics around what could be happening in the environment. So you're looking at information like loss event frequency. You're looking at the kind of threat event frequency, the vulnerabilities that are open, the loss magnitude. This looks probably very similar to the actuarial tables that insurance companies use. I know at the moment cyber insurance doesn't use any actuary-based tables, but this is what we're trying to do. Because once you're armed with this information, you can take a very different view. As you can see from the curves on the right-hand side, we've got like a low, a maximum, and a medium point. And what we can do is we can actually start mapping these into some specific scenarios. Here we can see ransomware with encryption or data breach with exfiltration as two examples. What we're effectively doing is creating a spectral range that the business can understand. Because if you think about your chief risk officer, business risk officer, that's what they're going to be doing. They're looking at scenarios like this and trying to understand what could be the minimum hit, what could be the maximum hit, and what's the likelihood right now based on our current posture. And you can see in these two scenarios, just the ransomware alone, because it's quite topical, 12.3 million based on alert and telemetry information that we see in your environment. And it equates to about 18% of your annual revenue. That's the language, that's the business that the board will understand and will justify your security budgets or your programs that you're looking to do. Yeah. And we can see some of the outcomes that come out of it. It's very much, I would say, the language of the business. It's informing decisions and investments. That's key. Now you're kind of saying something based on some tangible facts, based on your environment, and mapping it back to some business context. What you're also doing is really, I would say, influencing business, including non-cyber decision makers, where the key of the problem is, really. I talked about it earlier about saying cyber risk is a shared model now. And it's things like this which will obviously help going forwards. So, thinking about that mind shift change, we really need to be thinking about two factors here. We need to get on the front foot and have that proactive approach. And I would say move away from those tools. So it's really taking a platform or a framework-based approach to all of this. If we kind of just think about what does this actually look like, well, let's just step it back in terms of what are the kind of core components of a security strategy. And look at it in terms of, I would say, investment profile that goes with it. The majority of the investment, in fact, the bulk of it, is in that top right-hand corner. It's the layered security controls. So these are the protection mechanisms that I talked about earlier. Firewalls, malware, email security, web proxies, that kind of stuff. And as the kind of threat landscape has evolved over time, and we know that we can't do these signature-based controls or kind of looking for basic anomalies, we've got to go to this kind of era where really we need to look for anomalies. We need to be able to see some pattern, some behavior that we haven't seen before and take action on it. And this is where kind of detection and response starts to come in. And we've seen some significant investment starting happening in this place, certainly around XDR capability, around SIEM, and SOAR. The area that we really want to focus on is on the proactive side. As I mentioned before, if you can address these things first, you can significantly improve the other three. But surprisingly enough, this is the area that's got the least amount of spend. Partly because these tools are disconnected. But if you take a platform approach and start to map in your attack surface, your vulnerability information, your attack path prediction, and map it in with like what we call the real-time telemetry information, you're creating almost I would say, a cyber fusion platform. You're marrying real-time alert information with what a governance and risk team would use in terms of exposure information. And these are the byproducts that come out of it. You know, you're going to prevent breaches before they occur. Certainly going to reduce that incident response costs and the downtime that's associated with it. And that shift from reactive overspending to predictive defenses as well. So, how do you go about doing this? One approach is you could build the platform yourself. Question is, do you have the time, the money, the expertise? And you go back to the trap that I spoke about probably about half an hour ago, I think nearly, that you've got all these tools and you've got the complexity of managing them. Or you could look to see what AWS and Trend Micro are doing in this space and take a platform approach that's integrated, not only from an independent security vendor like us, but also with the cloud fabric itself. And we have a platform called Vision One that does exactly this. If you think about the capabilities of the cloud, a lot of people are looking at things like CNAP. If the platform gives you that in that top right-hand corner, but also gives you risk information, say actually we see these things, this could occur, then you start to leverage tools and that telemetry together to take some proactive action. So what does actually Vision One give you? It gives you kind of three things at its core. It's about that visibility piece, giving you a complete picture across your enterprise. And when I mean complete picture, I mean everything from on-premise out to the cloud and across that full stack, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Yeah? It's giving you that prioritization as well. So I talked about the risks, talked about the exposure. That's fine. But where do you start on that list? What matters the most? The platform, because it's got contextual information about your business critical assets, we can start giving you a list of where to begin and then go forward from there. And we'll also give you the mitigations that go with it as well. How do I fix this misconfiguration? Or how do I change the permissions on this so it's a bit more kind of acceptable in corporate governance? And when we get this right, your kind of security platform it kind of helps your business kind of go forward. It actually becomes ingrained and becomes a business enabler for your initiatives, for your programs. Because what we're starting to do now is we're holistically managing cyber risk in one go. We're actually streamlining, I would say, SecOps or security operations with automation and contextual visibility. We're strengthening compliance through automated reporting and dashboards. But most importantly, we're bridging that gap between leadership and operations. Because that's where the gap is right now. That's why security spend or budget availability is so low, because it's leadership just can't see the connection between I'm spending so much money on these technology components and what does it mean back to the business. Okay, and we'll see a practical example of this now. So this is with Northeast Georgia Health System, and I'll just put up a statement from Stuart Samples, the CTO. Northeast Georgia Health System is a regional healthcare delivery provider. They're a non-profit community health system, which is based around 5 campus hospitals, I would say. They have about 1,000 beds, 1,500 medical staff, specializing over 60 specialities, right? It was vital for NGHS to architect and operate a secure 24/7, so 24/7 solution to meet the needs of critical operating environment. And this is an environment where you've got on-premise, you've got legacy, you've got new stuff, you've got that IT, and you've got OT boundaries as well. It's marrying all of that together. And you can see from Stuart's statement, when he approached Trend Micro and AWS, his intention was about risk reduction, was his main goal. And his kind of biggest area of concern was the attack surface, internal and external, and getting a handle on that, knowing what's out there, what does the exposure look like, and what does it mean. And we can see that these are the challenges, right? So he had exactly what I spoke about, that fragmented visibility with lots of different tools. Inefficient threat detection is having to do that manual correlation every time, and that kind of operational complexity as well. Talent resource allocation, people just doing day in, day out alert triage, not really kind of doing anything exciting, not doing any project work, not kind of driving innovation. And I think after an extensive study, they looked at Vision 1. And these are the solutions they took. They took the cyber risk exposure management module to give them that kind of foresight and understanding what could happen. They used cloud extensively, so they took the cloud security elements as well, endpoint and email. And then they also took threat intelligence as well. So you can see the elements of the platform coming together to give that picture. And these are the kind of real-world business impacts that they got out of it. 60% reduction in time spent chasing false positives. I mean, that's huge on its own. I would say, Trend Vision 1 has enabled them to secure its rapidly growing systems. Gives them both that proactive and reactive kind of security strategies, and gives them a handle on that attack surface as well, assessing risk and mitigating those active threats. The XDR capabilities have helped improve the team's efficiency and providing that centralized visibility as well. And again, bottom right-hand corner, simplified reporting to board of directors. That's helped them huge because that's now secured some of their investment profile going forward for other initiatives that they want. You can read the full story on this QR code. I'll leave it up for a few minutes. Don't worry, it is good. I know QR codes have got a bit of an issue, but no, it is good. And let's quickly start to wrap this up. So, what have we spoken about? Cyber risk is a business risk. I think you can all understand that now and why it's important. You've got to measure it, manage it, and mitigate it like any other business risk. A proactive, platform-based approach is what will drive that resilience. Being able to operate under stress conditions, disruption, or any kind of outage. And really what Trend Vision 1 and AWS combined together really just make it simple. And if you're up for it and you can crack the code, come down to the stand, and you could win $10,000 as well. I think there might be some Trend people in the audience as well. They might have one or two of the numbers if you ask them nicely, but let's see. And that's it, really. So I'll open the floor up to any questions that anyone's got. No? In that case, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.